This took place on April 23rd of last year. For context, I live in Minnesota, where spring weather can be quite unpredictable. I had just become friends with a co-worker named Ben, mainly because we are both fans of horror films and enjoy discussing them. We live in a very remote area with not much else to do. When we found out that one of our favorite movies was being re-released in theaters in a city a couple hours away, we decided to make a trip out of it. We planned to stay overnight in the city, then head to a cabin near the Mississippi River another few hours away. I booked the cabin on Vrbo 2 months in advance. The listing mentioned 2 sheds on the property. One was off-limits and used for the owner's storage, but the other had a sitting area with some recreational items in it, pool table, kayaks, and cornhole boards. A week before our trip, I received an email with basic booking details, but it noted that the host hadn't provided information on how to access the cabin. I contacted the host directly to ask about getting in, but I never received a response. On Thursday, we went to go see the movie and ended up bar hopping afterward. I had too much to drink. The next morning, I woke up in the hotel room with a terrible hangover, and I was not happy about the 7 a.m. checkout time. The cabin listing said that we would check in after 3 p.m., so we had some time to spare before the long drive. I still hadn't heard back from the host, but I decided to wait it out and hoped that he would get back to me by 3 o'clock. It was one of the first warm weekends of spring, reaching the mid-60s. Ben and I grabbed some breakfast and took a short hike before setting off. Once we arrived in the nearest town to the cabin, we stopped at a grocery store for supplies and booze. I still hadn't heard back from the host, and it was now past 3 o'clock, so I messaged him again, but got no response. First, I tried the chat support, which gave me his phone number. However, when I called it, it wasn't in service. Next, I called customer support, and the attendant found it odd that the host had removed his phone number from the account. She said that she would call back in about 5 minutes. When she did, she told me that she had gotten in touch with the owner and that he would contact me soon. Almost immediately after hanging up with her, I received a phone call. The host apologized, saying that he had forgotten to note that he had rented out the cabin for that weekend. I told him I understood. Mistakes happen, and I was just glad that we sorted it out since Ben and I hadn't driven almost 4 hours across the state for nothing. He said everything would be ready in an hour. I was a bit annoyed, but I didn't want to argue with him. He called back within the hour to say that the cabin was ready and asked how many nights we were staying. Call me crazy, but I think he should have already known how long we booked it for. That's 2 oddities so far. Forgetting someone booked his cabin and not knowing for how long. 3, if we're counting how he didn't respond to anyone until now. He mentioned over the phone that he lived nearby and not to hesitate to ask if we needed anything. He said that the cabin would be unlocked and the keys would be on the counter. When we finally arrived at the cabin, we started unloading our things. The yard sloped down about 40 feet to a dock along the river. The cabin was cozy, with 1 bedroom, a loft above, and an open layout. Ben took the bedroom, and I set up in the loft. The cabin had windows on all 4 sides, offering a near 360-degree view of the surroundings, except for the walls making up the bedroom. Since it was warm, we decided to keep the windows open at night. We built a small fire outside, grilled some walleyes we caught off the dock, and had a few beers. When it got late, we put out the fire and went back inside. There was a small TV mounted in the living room, opposite the loft. Ben turned it on and flipped through the channels. The only light came from the TV and the fan light above the stove. I climbed the ladder to the loft to get my phone charger from my bag. I was looking down into the living room, talking with Ben while he stood facing me. The back door, which was more of a side door to the cabin, had the trash cans next to it under the windows. Here I had noticed a water bottle lying on the ground nearby. While we were talking, we heard the sound of plastic being crushed, like when someone collapses an empty water bottle with their hand or steps on it. I turned to the window and caught a glimpse of a figure ducking out of sight. My stomach dropped and my heart began to race. I quickly jumped down from the ladder and told Ben to close all the windows. We shut all 12 of the windows of the cabin and drew the curtains closed. Ben thought I was just being paranoid and suggested it was likely a raccoon, saying that there was no need to call and wake up our host over a scavenging carnivora. I went to turn on the outside light, but discovered that there was no bulb in the fixture. Ben and I each took a flashlight and walked in opposite directions around the cabin, but we didn't notice anything odd. We decided to call it a night after that. While I was dozing off, I swear I could hear movement from outside, like footsteps walking around the cabin. I assumed it might have been a deer wandering around out there and fell asleep. The next morning, while preparing to check out a nearby hiking trail, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a middle-aged man with a pair of cold eyes that looked like they could stare you into submission. "Are you Evan?" I said yes, and he introduced himself as the owner of the property. We got to talking, and he apologized for the check-in issues, giving me a gift card to a local restaurant as a gesture of goodwill. He asked if he could hang around outside for about half an hour, because he had forgotten to do some minor maintenance. Oh, sure. I watched him from a window as he set up a bird feeder out front, then checked the lock on the shed that was off limits. He then just stood there, eyeballing the cabin for a while, before finally leaving. Very strange. We received weather alerts about an approaching snowstorm that would come through the next day, so we went into town to buy some more food, since we planned on staying another 2 nights. Once we returned, I went to grab something out of my bag and noticed that it was unzipped and moved a foot off to the side. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I misremembered where I had placed my bag and simply forgot to zip it back up. In hindsight, I'm not so sure about that. That night, we spent it inside gaming and watching movies while the storm passed through. Monday was checkout day. Ben gathered our belongings while I cleaned the cabin. I took out some trash and stood by the back door, taking pictures of the river. I should mention that Ben and I smoke a little reefer every now and then. When we got back to the truck and were making our way down the snow-covered driveway, Ben joked, "You wanted to get high so bad last night that you went out in that snow and wind. You're crazy." I was confused and asked him what he meant by that, because I hadn't even brought any weed with me on this trip. He looked puzzled and said, "When I first went outside, I saw half-filled-in footprints in the snow to and from the sheds around my truck and both cabin doors. It then dawned on me when our host said that he lived nearby. I couldn't help but think he was staying in the shed. That was off limits, and he was apparently walking around the cabin at night, even during the snowstorm, and had gone through our stuff when we left for the store. From the moment we got there, that place gave me bad vibes, and I won't be returning to that place in my lifetime." When I was around 17, the year was 2017. Urbex had become pretty popular on YouTube, and living in a small town in Minnesota, there was no shortage of abandoned places to explore if you knew where to look. So I decided to hop on the trend. There was a 3-story mansion just outside of Asante, about 50 miles north of Minneapolis, that had been abandoned for around 20 years. The mansion itself was literally in the middle of nowhere. There were several rumors about what happened at that place, from an entire family being murdered by an escaped psychopath to some kind of deformed man living there. The true story is much less exciting. The owner was in major debt, went broke, and his house was eventually repossessed by the bank. They tried to turn it into a rental property, but a severe mold infestation prevented that. Ever since, it just sat empty and rotting away. I talked to my group of friends about exploring the place for a possible YouTube video. We would make a quick walkthrough with just me and another friend, David, to check things out before bringing the entire gang along with the camera gear. One Saturday night, around 11 p.m., David and I parked on a back road about a quarter mile away from the destination. We really didn't want to get caught. The police around here are pretty bored most of the time and would have jumped at the chance to arrest a couple of teenagers for trespassing. The house sat on a 3-acre property, mostly surrounded by forest. We hiked through the trees, making sure we kept our flashlight used to a minimum, until we came upon the old house. Our original plan was to go through the back door, but it was locked, so we decided to go around to the front of the house and try our luck there. We entered a porch area that appeared to have been screened in at some point, but was now just metal frames with shreds of mesh hanging from them. There was also an assortment of old furniture, lawn chairs, and wooden crates. After looking around for a bit and snapping some photos, we approached a pair of double doors, only to see that they were chained shut. Most of the windows we saw were either boarded up or completely smashed out. We wanted to avoid entering through a broken window if we could, but it looked like we would have no choice. So we found an opening on the ground level on the other side of the house. As we approached, I got this strange feeling like something terrible was about to happen. I knew the rumors of what took place here were just made-up stories, but standing outside the dark, abandoned mansion in the dead of night was enough to make even a skeptic like me second-guess himself. Just because those stories never happened didn't mean nothing ever bad happened here. I'll admit that my apprehension did involve some concern about spooky ghosts. I grabbed David's shoulder and stopped him from going any further. "What's the problem?" I thought I heard something. "Just listen." In truth, I hadn't heard anything. I just wanted him to stop walking so we could both listen before entering the old house. We were approaching the open window from an angle so we couldn't see directly into it, but it's a good thing we stopped when we did, because what we heard next was far scarier than what I had initially been concerned about. The pump of a shotgun is a sound that immediately grabs your attention, and that's exactly what we heard coming from the open window. As soon as we heard it, David and I hauled ass in the opposite direction, running back toward the front porch and making our way around the other side of the house the way we had come from. As soon as we made it back to the tree line, we heard a gunshot coming from the mansion. I'm not 100% sure if someone was firing at us, because the blast did sound like it came from somewhere inside the mansion, but we weren't sticking around to find out. We backtracked to the car and got the hell out of there. Needless to say, we never ended up filming an urbex video there. I'm not sure what was taking place inside that old mansion the night we went there, but someone was inside that house with a loaded shotgun. It could have been just some vandal putting in some target practice, but something tells me they were waiting for us to come within the direct line of sight of that open window, shotgun aimed. I don't know that for sure. They could have just stayed quiet and we would have kept going toward the window, but for whatever reason, they decided to pump their shotgun, alerting us to their presence. I suppose if they really wanted us dead, I wouldn't be here now telling this story. This event effectively ended my urbex aspirations. We never returned to Shotgun Manor, but as far as I'm aware, it still sits there to this day, silent but empty. I couldn't tell you. My story involves myself and 3 of my really good friends from childhood. I'll have them go by Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy, whom I am still very good friends with to this day. I wouldn't be able to recount this experience if it wasn't for their help. The story you are about to hear is true and not made up in any way. Regardless of whether we have been seeing things or not, the reality is we experienced something truly horrifying one night at Tommy's family-owned cabin. We thought long and hard about actually sharing it, afraid of being ridiculed, but we were finally ready to put this out there. One of my friends actually suffered a nervous breakdown after the incident and needed counseling. Regardless, I would like you to know that I have always been skeptical of the paranormal and find it hard to believe in many aspects, but I love to watch, listen, and read about it, simply because I have an open mind. In my opinion, an open mind is a growing one. Whether what took place was paranormal or not, someone was clearly there that night. Now, finally, on with the story. During midsummer, usually around the middle of July, my group of friends and I always made time to go to Tommy's cabin in northern Minnesota, Vermilion Lake to be exact. Throughout all of our childhood years, we would always go, accompanied by Tommy's dad, and sometimes a few of our dads as well. At this time, we were juniors in high school, and we all felt mature enough to go to the cabin without any adult supervision. I would like to mention a bit of information regarding the cabin to help you picture the scenario. Vermilion Lake is very remote, and the cabin is situated on a very large island along with some other cabins, but the nearest one was a solid half-mile away, which you could get to by taking a hiking trail. To get to my friend's cabin, you had to park on a gravel road and then take a boat across the lake to reach the island. The cabin was a single story with only 2 bedrooms next to each other. The kitchen was connected to the living room, and there was a small bathroom in the back. Anywhere you slept in the cabin, there was always a window somewhere nearby, with no privacy curtains at all, so it was very easy to see outside into the forest and lake. And this is where my imagination would run wild, as I always thought someone was peering in on us at night. Of course, nobody ever was. I had been to this cabin a dozen times throughout my life, and nothing ever bad happened here. The older I got, the easier it was to sleep. Now for the event. We planned to spend 4 or 5 nights out there. It was on the 3rd night into our stay when we set up a campfire and had been drinking pretty much all night. I don't condone underage drinking, but we were a bunch of rebels back then. We made our way out to the dock to gaze up at the night sky and enjoy our buzz, when all of a sudden we heard something splashing in the water. We quickly look out to the lake, wondering where the noise came from. Thankfully, the moon was out that night, which helped illuminate the lake. Otherwise, it would have been pitch black, as we were far from any street lights or lampposts. Ryan spoke up. What the hell is that?" After looking closely and finally spotting what he was pointing at, I can only describe it as a head. Dust floating out in the lake, not on its side, but upright, staring directly at us. It was about the length of a football field away from the dock. There was no question that we could see it. It was there. I couldn't make out any facial features at that distance, just pale skin covered by long black hair. I'll never forget that feeling that came over me. The hairs on my legs, neck, and arms stood up, and I was paralyzed on the inside. But we told ourselves it was just a loon, as they are very popular at this lake and do a lot of night hunting. They also have black and white colors on their coats, and they deep dive into the water, holding their breath for up to minutes at a time during their hunts. So it was possible that a loon had suddenly popped up in the water, or at least we tried to talk ourselves into that scenario. All of us noticed that the head wasn't moving at all, just trotting water while remaining perfectly still. We went back to our campfire, threw some wood on it to make it even brighter, and eventually headed back inside to drink some more. I would like to mention that there was a staircase outside my friend's cabin, about 8 steps in length, down to the bottom where the fire pit was, and beyond that, the dock. We soon forgot about the floating head, with the help of the beer. That was until I had to use the restroom, and the one stall that we had inside was occupied. I just went outside to do my business. During the draining process, I was glancing out at the moonlit lake when I noticed that the head was still out there, but about 30 yards closer than before, still looking as if it was staring right at me. I could easily see the nose on this thing's face. It was clearly not a loon. A very uneasy feeling came over me, and I immediately went inside, told the others to come and look, never taking my eyes off of it while I stood in the cabin's doorway. Someone else came outside to see it was still there, in the water. The head was now cocked up at us, with its chin in the air, looking at us. Nobody dared to go down to the dock anymore, and we immediately went back inside. The rest of the group also came to the same conclusion I had. It wasn't a loon. A bird wouldn't stay perfectly still like that in the water. This head-like object was as stiff as a coffin. It had been further away earlier and had moved closer, but it was a beeline movement. Birds don't move like that either. There was no ripple effect at all from the object. I could tell that everyone else felt uneasy too. A few hours passed, and it was getting late. We knew that we had to get some sleep. Being curious, I looked outside one last time, and the object had vanished. I felt relieved, thinking it might have been a strange-looking log that must have floated off and hit shore somewhere. We slept with the windows open that night. There was no AC in the cabin, and it was the middle of the summer. Tommy and I were in the living room, while the other two were in separate bedrooms with their doors open. I had trouble falling asleep. I kept my eyes shut and heard someone walking at the bottom of the stairs near the campfire and dock. Pacing back and forth, frozen in fear, I wanted to whisper to Tommy, but I couldn't. Suddenly, I heard the footsteps taking 2 steps up the stairs, then turned and sprinted down the path. After they faded, and a couple of minutes passed, I woke Tommy, asking if he had heard it too. As we sat up, Brian walked out of his room, saying that we needed to leave. Something disturbing in his expression prompted me to ask, why? He didn't answer. He proceeded to wake up Kevin, shouting, "Everyone get your shit together and get in the boat." "The hell is wrong with you?" I asked. While grabbing his stuff, Brian explained. While tossing and turning in bed, he saw someone peering in the top right corner of his bedroom window. One eye, ghostly white skin, and long hair before it shifted out of view. Looking back, it chills us to realize that, since it was up at the corner, this thing was either 8 feet tall or was somehow scaling the side of the cabin. Come on, let's get the fuck out of here. Everyone just packed up, and we bolted, not bothering to clean up the mess we made in the cabin. While locking up, we saw bare footprints in the dirt around the cabin and along the path. We hurried to the boat, threw our stuff in, untied it, and sped off. Not daring to look in the water, my eyes stayed glued to the island, but I saw nothing. After loading the car and tying up the boat, we drove off. 10 miles out, Brian broke down, sobbing. What was that? What did I see? We called our parents, explaining what happened and that Brian was freaking out. They told us to do our best to calm him down and to get home safely. It was around 4 or 5 a.m. at this point, and the rest of the ride back home was silent. Tommy's dad went up there the next weekend and experienced nothing, though he noted that he saw bare footprints like we did, which bothered him. Whatever Brian saw hit him hard. He struggled to sleep for weeks afterward, needing medication, but he eventually recovered, though he avoids windows that have no curtains now. I can't explain what happened, what I saw in the lake, or what Brian saw looking in at him. It could have been a prank gone wrong when Brian spotted the figure, but the floating object in the lake remains a mystery. Its timing with the bare footprints and the window incident feels connected. Nothing has occurred at that cabin since, according to Tommy's dad, who I trust. Tommy and Kevin have been back there, but Brian and I refuse to return. Despite the fond childhood memories there, there's always a reason to be afraid.